My name's Lena Whitmore, and I've spent most of my life sitting at the edge of family tables, both literally and metaphorically. You know the spot, furthest from the conversation, closest to the kitchen door, where the chair wobbles and no one notices if you're even there. My last family dinner before everything shifted was at my parents' place in Binghamton. There were fairy lights over the porch, white plates on a plastic folding table, and the same stale jokes floating through the air like smoke from the grill. And Nadine, my sister, was already 2 glasses in, holding court like she was running for office. She always knew how to make an entrance. That day was in her pale yellow maxi dress, with layered gold chains and a voice that could cut glass. When I walked in, she didn't even say hi. She looked over her sunglasses and said, "Well, look what the wind dragged back from whatever classified cave she's been hiding in." It got a laugh from everyone, even my Uncle Roy, who can't name a state west of Ohio, but suddenly thought that was hilarious. I just smiled. You learn to do that when you've had decades of being the punchline. I sat down next to the cooler, again, the edge seat, and tried not to look annoyed when Nadine got handed the first burger with double cheese, and mine came out half raw. It's been that way since we were kids. She got the front seat. She got the extra scoop. On my 7th birthday, Mom sliced the sheet cake and handed Nadine the corner piece with all the pink frosting roses. Mine was a flat center slab. No rosette, no candle, just a square of sugar and silence. There was no enormous tragedy in it, no dramatic fight or fallout. It was just the constant hum of not enough, not loud enough to argue with, just steady enough to shape you. Nadine was the golden child. Her spelling tests were framed. Her cheer competitions were live-streamed to relatives. She once got a thank you note from a 5th grade teacher for showing exceptional group leadership. I once got a call home for too much independent thinking. My mom told me that one with a wine laugh and said, "You've always been difficult to guide." What she meant was that I didn't fall in line. I was quiet, obsessed with planes by age 12. While Nadine read Teen Vogue under her pink duvet, I sketched Blue Angels jets on my math homework. When she went to prom with a guy named Travis, who had 2 different colognes on at once, I was at the airfield, asking some retired mechanic if I could help wipe down propellers just to be near something that could fly. They didn't get it. "It's just a phase," Mom said. "Maybe try something more normal." Dad never looked up from his paper. The most approval I got was when I vacuumed without being asked. Nadine, meanwhile, stayed close, married young to a real estate guy named Hunter, who thinks being loud equals being interesting, had 2 kids, joined a neighborhood wine club, and started wearing coordinated outfits for family photo shoots. Every post on social media was a canvas of perfection. Feeling grateful for this tribe, with 20 likes from the same 4 women, her comment was always pinned first. She still lives 5 blocks from our parents. Still gets invited to pop-in dinners. Still tells everyone I'm probably doing spy stuff whenever I can't make it to Thanksgiving. But the thing is, I wasn't hiding, I just stopped explaining. After a few too many times of hearing, "Oh wow, that sounds intense," followed by, "So anyway, Nadine's baby can almost say avocado," I figured out that it's not worth talking when no one's listening. And you know what? If you've ever been in that position or felt like the extra chair at your table, drop a comment below. I'm not saying we should start a support group, but solidarity matters. And if this feels a little too familiar, hit subscribe. You might want to see how this plays out. Anyway, that day in Binghamton, I left before dessert. Nadine was talking about launching a lifestyle brand. My mom was asking if Hunter should refinance. And my dad, as usual, was pretending the dog needed walking just to escape it all. I stood up quietly, nodded at no one in particular, and drove back to my hotel, wondering why I kept trying to matter to people who'd already decided I didn't. It's funny, you spend your whole life being the background character until one day, someone salutes you like you're the lead. And that day, it was coming faster than they thought. I didn't go back to the hotel right away. I drove past it until the road narrowed and the town signs disappeared. It was quiet out there, nothing but fields, busted up mailboxes, and the occasional flag flapping on a broken pole. The place people forget unless they're trying to get lost. That was the first time I'd driven back to the old hangar. It hadn't changed much. The roof still sagged on one side, the paint peeled from the metal siding, and the same crooked sign still read, O'Neill Aircraft Repair. Though I knew Clint hadn't worked there in over a decade. The place had no working office and barely any walls left, but the smell of oil, rubber, and sun-baked dust was still there, exactly as it was the day I first wandered in at 12. Back then, I didn't go looking for planes. I went looking for silence. The home wasn't exactly violent, but it was loud in the worst ways. Expectations, passive aggression, and a sister who could turn anything into a competition. So when I found the hangar that summer, I stepped inside because no one was yelling there. That's where I met Clint O'Neill, retired mechanic, Korean war vet, and unofficial mayor of that scrap pile. He didn't ask questions, just nodded, handed me a rag, and pointed at a wing covered in grime. You want to touch a plane? Clean it first. I must have spent that whole summer wiping parts I didn't recognize and listening to Clint talk about throttle control, G-force, and pilots who didn't make it home. He never treated me like a kid, or a girl, or someone wasting his time. If I asked something dumb, he'd answer it straight, then make me look it up later. He didn't say I had talent. He said I had curiosity, and that meant more. One day he climbed into a gutted crop duster and motioned for me to follow. Seats busted. Don't lean back too hard. I remember climbing in like it was the cockpit of a space shuttle. He pointed to the controls, let me feel the stick, and then looked me dead in the eye. Not many people in this town think girls belong up here, he said. Hell, most of them don't think anyone from this town belongs anywhere but down here. So you got two options. Wait for them to change their minds, or prove you were right all along. It wasn't a pep talk. It was more like a warning, but it stuck, especially when I got home that night, and Mom told me I smelled like machine grease and poor decisions. Later that year, I got a flyer from school about a summer aviation program in Syracuse. It was expensive, selective, and not something we do, according to my dad. I begged. Mom rolled her eyes and said, "We're not sending you off to crash a plane for fun." So, I forged her signature. I cleaned after school at a local vet clinic to cover the bus fare and meals. Clint pulled some magic with the application fee, but never said how. The program wasn't glamorous. I spent most of it sweating in an ill-fitting headset, getting barked at by instructors who thought yelling was motivational. But for the first time, I wasn't the weird, quiet one. I was just another kid chasing lift. When I got back, no one asked how it went. Nadine had just made varsity cheer captain and hosted a party in the backyard to celebrate. My dad grilled. My mom made a banner. With my certificate still in my backpack, I watched them toast to her, focus and drive. That night, I took the banner down when no one was looking and threw it in the trash, not out of spite. I just wanted to see if anyone noticed. They didn't. I mailed a handwritten letter to the Air Force recruiting office in A the following week. That letter sat in a drawer for almost 2 years before I hit send. But writing it felt like the first time I stopped shrinking to fit their idea of me. Clint once told me, "You're gonna fly whether they want you to. Just don't wait for permission." He died before he saw me wear a uniform. But every time I zipped it up, I remembered how he looked at a broken-down propeller as if it still had more work. That's how I learned to look at myself. I kept that letter folded in the back of my drawer, right under the wrench Clint gave me. I take it out sometimes and read it like it had answers. If I stared long enough, the page would fill in the rest of my life. It didn't. So I mailed it the day I turned 17. I was accepted to Clearwater Air Force Academy 6 months later. Orientation felt like a punch in the chest. There were rules about everything: how to stand, how to fold socks, how loud to speak when reciting something you barely understood. The other cadets came in with family members in the military, legacy pins, stories about dads flying B-52s and uncles in Gulf War units. I showed up with a backpack that smelled like my dog and a file no one could read. They called me Quiet One or Poster Girl, depending on the day. First flight sim, I bombed. I crashed the damn thing into a virtual hillside because I hesitated. One of the instructors, Captain Morrow, barked loud enough for the whole hangar to hear, "You can't second-guess gravity." Someone slid a sticky note onto my bunk the next day. Maybe try nursing school. It didn't sting the way you'd think. It felt expected. Like this was just another room I'd walked into that wasn't made for me. Still, I stayed. I studied harder than I ever had. I learned that if you ask enough questions, even the cockiest guys start listening. I memorized engine specs, like scripture. I ran until my legs shook and pushed through flight drills until my fingers cramped on the throttle. Late one night, after hours on the simulator, I returned to my room, pulled out Clint's wrench, and held it in my palm like a medal. I didn't pray over it or whisper promises. I just let it sit there, cool, heavy, real. The following week, we had a practical exam. Instrument-only approach landing, simulated crosswinds. I could feel Morrow watching me the whole time, waiting to see if I'd choke again. But I didn't. I flew clean. Hit every mark. Landed so smoothly that even the instructor next to me muttered, "Well, damn." I didn't smile. I just logged the numbers and moved on. Outside the simulator bay, a few cadets gave half-hearted nods. One girl from Texas, Ramirez, slapped my shoulder and said, "About time you showed up." I said nothing, but my stomach stopped twisting for once. I didn't tell anyone, but kept track of every tiny win. I had a list in my locker, nothing big, just bullet points. First clean sim, no sweat during inspection, didn't flinch when Morrow yelled. Finally, I got called Whitmore instead of "What's her name?" That's the thing no one tells you about confidence. It doesn't show up simultaneously like a significant moment in a movie. It builds, slowly, quietly, like rust in reverse. At the end of the semester, we were supposed to write a reflection essay. Why do you want to fly? Some people turned in dramatic monologues. I turned in 2 sentences. I don't want to fly, I already do. I just need the license to prove it. Morrow handed it back with a red mark and a note. That's not enough. But he also circled "already do" and underlined it twice. That was enough for me. I got my first flight clearance that spring. I called home from the recreation center payphone. Mom picked up. I told her the news. She said, "Oh, that's great, honey. Have you eaten?" I said yes, then listened as she told me Nadine had joined a local women's leadership council. "She's doing so well," Mom said. "Always so driven." I didn't respond, just said, "Tell her congrats." Then hung up and sat there for a long time with the phone still in my hand. Outside, the air smelled like jet fuel and cut grass. A plane passed overhead, and for the first time, I didn't look up. I already knew what it felt like to be above it. I stopped calling home after that. Not out of spite, just efficiency. There wasn't much point in updating people who thought my job was a hobby, or worse, a phase. That spring, I got stationed at Fort Rainer for advanced flight training. Nothing about it was glamorous. Think of chain-link fences, cracked pavement, and vending machines that mostly ate your money. Our barracks had cots that squeaked if you breathed too hard, and showers with only 2 temperatures, boiling and Arctic. But we flew every day. The first time I stepped into a real cockpit, I sat in the left seat and thought, this is it. This is the job. No speeches, no slow motion moment. Just switches, gauges, and protocol. And the air. That's where I met Jordan Phelps. She was from Idaho, loud in the best way, and fast with everything, walking, talking, thinking. She first told me, "You look like you overthink checklists," then handed me gum and said, "Chew this when you fly. Helps with pressure. Also, it calms your nerves, unless you're a robot." We got paired for tandem drills. She called me LT Quiet Storm. I called her Crash Test Barbie. It worked. We trained over the next 6 months like lives depended on it, because they did. Formation flying, evasive maneuvers, engine failure drills, night landings with complete blackout. I never once saw Jordan rattle. She'd make jokes mid-flight while I clenched my jaw hard enough to crack molars. Once, during a mock dogfight simulation, I nearly pulled us into a stall. I hesitated on a roll. She didn't panic, just yelled, "Punch it, Whitmore, or we're gonna lawn dart into Nevada." We pulled out with 5 seconds to spare. After we landed, she slapped my helmet and said, "You got ice in your veins, girl. Stop hiding it." We weren't best friends in the movie sense. No matching bracelets or tearful confessions. But there was a kind of trust that comes from knowing someone won't let you die stupid. She was one of the few people who never asked what I did before flying. She only cared how I flew now. Then came the night drill in September. Clear skies, low wind, standard protocol. Jordan was flying solo that evening. I was on ground crew rotation, double-checking pre-flight charts, sipping gas station coffee that tasted like burnt rubber. We waved each other off. She winked and said, "Try not to miss me too much." 15 minutes in, her radio went dark. No warning, no distress call. Just silence, then static, then tower panic. They found the wreckage in the ridge 40 miles south. Mechanical failure. She tried to glide it in but hit the ground at a bad angle. The cockpit was crushed. She died instantly. I didn't cry. Not then. They helped me file the incident report. I read the flight log 3 times, then signed my name on the bottom of the page. The commander said, "It's good that you're calm." I wasn't calm. I was somewhere past numb. I found her gum stash later. She always kept a pack in her flight suit. I took one and chewed it until my jaw hurt. Then I slid the rest into my locker and taped a note to the door. "Don't flinch." That week, I started waking up at 0400. Not because I had to, because I needed to. I ran laps around the hangar before anyone else was up. I memorized every checklist. I volunteered for every extra drill. Not to prove anything, just to stay ahead of the subsequent loss. Grief makes some people slow down. It made me sharpen. At graduation, they called Jordan's name last, posthumous honor. Her parents stood and accepted her wings. I stayed seated and kept my hands still. People clapped. I didn't. Later that night, I sat alone on the training field. No lights, no ceremony, just sky. I looked up for the first time in weeks. For a second, I thought I saw movement. Something fast and high, gone before you could name it. I wanted to believe it was her. But believing things doesn't bring them back. I got my wings the next day. Pinned it to my chest. Didn't take a photo. Didn't send a message home. Instead, I pulled out the old wrench Clint gave me and the spare patch from Jordan's flight suit and stitched them into the lining of my flight bag. People say flying is freedom. That's not true. It's discipline. It's weight. It's being trusted to do the right thing at the worst possible moment. And it starts before you ever leave the ground. I didn't touch the wings ceremony photo folder they gave me. I left it sealed, shoved it in my locker, and went straight to the tarmac. 48 hours later, I was on a red-eye to New York with a duffel bag and a headache that wouldn't quit. It was my first visit home in nearly 4 years. I didn't tell anyone I was coming until the night before. Mom texted back, "Okay," with a period. No exclamation point, no, "Can't wait to see you." Just, okay. Nadine, of course, already had something planned. A backyard BBQ with friends, neighbors, and some guy named Keith, who once sold her a treadmill and now gets invited to every family thing for some reason. Nothing fancy, she said on the phone. Just good old-fashioned togetherness. The house looks smaller than I remembered. The bushes were trimmed like Nadine had hired a landscaper. And a chalkboard sign near the porch said, "Grill and chill with the Whitmores." The kind of thing you see on Pinterest and assume no real person does. But there it was, in script font. When I walked into the yard, Nadine spotted me first. She waved, wine glass already half empty, and called out, "There she is! Miss Flyover States herself?" People laughed. Some polite, some too loud. I gave a short wave and kept walking toward the drinks table. Mom hugged me with one arm, the way you hug someone who just stepped in dog poop. Dad said, "You look different," and asked if I remembered how to flip burgers. Nadine, meanwhile, was dressed like she'd just come from a realtor-themed fashion show. Hair curled, full makeup, white jeans that didn't attract ketchup. She leaned in and whispered, "No uniform. I thought you people wore them like pajamas." I didn't answer, just poured myself a Sprite and focused on the condensation sliding down the can. The rest of the afternoon was a loop of small talk, mostly about things I couldn't care less about. Greg's new lawnmower, Nadine's HOA drama, and Keith's keto journey. At one point, someone asked what I was doing these days. Before I could respond, Nadine jumped in with, "Oh, she flies things, secret stuff. Probably nothing she can tell us, or she'd have to kill us, right?" I smiled like it was funny. No one noticed. I never said a word. After dinner, I pulled out the framed photo I'd brought for Mom. It was a shot of me in uniform, standing next to Brigadier General Hollister after our final drill cycle. The sun is in the background, and there are handshakes. I handed it to her and said, "Thought you might want this." She took it, nodded, and said, "How nice." Then I set it on a side table behind a stack of magazines and a baby monitor Nadine hadn't used in 2 years. A few minutes later, it was gone. I didn't ask where. The final blow came from my dad, and he didn't even mean it badly. We cleared plates when he said, "It's good to see you, kiddo. We thought maybe you'd gone full ghost." I said, "I've been pretty busy." He chuckled. "Doing what exactly? Still flying those big cargo planes?" I looked at him deadpan. "Tactical operations, training elite pilots." He blinked. "Like in simulators?" "Like in the sky." He nodded slowly. "Huh, that's intense." Then he asked if I could help him refill the ice bucket. I did. I always do. After everyone left, I walked back through the living room that night. The photo was gone. I asked Mom about it. "Oh, it's somewhere," she said. "Probably with the Christmas stuff. Or maybe I put it near the hallway shelf." She didn't look up from her crossword. I went to bed in my childhood room. The walls were repainted beige. The posters gone. The shelves filled with Nadine's old sorority trophies and a couple of her kids' drawings. I lay awake, fully clothed, staring at the ceiling fan that clicked on every third spin. Some people say going home reminds you who you are. That night, it reminded me of why I left. I caught the first flight out the next morning without waking anyone. No note, no goodbye. Just me, my duffel, and a growing list of reasons not to return. Nevada in summer feels like punishment. The air's sharp and dry, like it's trying to strip skin off your face. I liked it. It didn't pretend to be soft. I got stationed at Desert Command. One of those doesn't exist on Google Places. Buried in a valley and surrounded by nothing but sun-bleached dirt and rattlesnakes with attitude problems. The assignment was elite level, lead instructor for Valkyrie flight. A joint NATO program focused on preparing female pilots for high-altitude tactical response. That's a fancy way of saying we trained women to handle the kinds of missions that didn't make the news because they weren't supposed to. There were 12 cadets in the first cycle, some young, some older than me, all sharp, all tired, all carrying something behind their eyes. I wasn't interested in pep talks or fake inspiration. I trained them how I wish someone had trained me. No sugar, no shortcuts. I didn't bark at them but didn't baby them either. When they stumbled, I made them repeat the drill. When they aced it, I made them do it blindfolded. That's how you make sure it sticks under pressure. The base colonel once said, "Your girls look like they're scared of you." I said, "Good. Fear is faster than admiration." By the third week, they stopped flinching. By the fifth, they called me Mom before I walked in. By the end, they were better than I'd been at their age, and they knew it. That's where I met Amber Yoon, one of the youngest in the group. Korean-American, 24, deadly focused. She failed her first landing sequence and almost burst into tears. I pulled her aside and said, "No one cares if you cry. They care if you quit." "Are you quitting?" She shook her head hard. No, ma'am, I said. Then wipe your face and get back in the damn sim. 2 months later, she nailed a clean combat course that half the command team clapped in the control booth. She didn't smile until we debriefed. And even then, the kind of grin said, I'm just getting started. On the final day, she left a note in my locker. It said, I used to think strength meant being alone. You taught me it means staying anyway. Thank you for not giving up on me when I was about to give up on myself. You and I didn't reply, just folded the note and tucked it behind Clint's wrench. Sometime after that, Command offered me a medal. They called it the Leadership Excellence Citation. Sounded made up. Probably was. I declined. The guy handling the paperwork, Lieutenant Maris, looked confused. You're supposed to say thank you and take the picture, I said. I didn't do it for the frame, he muttered. You know people notice when you don't play the game. I said, good. Later that week, I made Lieutenant Colonel. No ceremony, just a new nameplate and the same desk. I liked it that way. They updated my ID badge. My clearance level jumped. Suddenly, officers who used to glance over me in briefings started standing when I walked in. Some out of respect, some are out of protocol. Same effect either way. The real moment didn't come with a title. It came in the break room at 0600. When I poured coffee, and Amber walked in early for drills. She stood straighter and said, Morning, Lieutenant Colonel. I nodded. Morning, Lieutenant. She hesitated, then said, I told my mom about you. She asked if I was scared. I said no, because if a woman like you can make it, so can I. I didn't say anything, because that's the thing about recognition. The kind that matters never needs applause. It walks in quietly, calls you by rank, and does the work. I left her note where it was and reviewed flight reports like nothing had shifted. That's the rhythm you fall into. Train, eat, debrief, sleep, repeat. It keeps the noise down. One morning, a plain white envelope showed up in my base mailbox. No return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Mom's, neat cursive, like a third-grade teacher who never stopped underlining things. Inside was a gold-trimmed card that read, You are cordially invited to celebrate Doreen Whitmore's 60th birthday. Private dining room. Formal dress code. RSVP by the 15th. No note. No, hope you can make it. Just an invitation, like I was being summoned to a wedding for someone I hadn't met. I stared at it for a while, tossed it on my desk, and returned to marking fuel anomalies. I reread that night while eating cold noodles from a styrofoam cup. I wasn't mad. I wasn't even surprised. I just couldn't tell if this was some awkward peace offering or if Nadine had bullied Mom into inviting me so she could play benevolent host in front of their social circle. Either way, it didn't matter. I marked it on my calendar, not because I planned to go, so I wouldn't forget what day to ignore. A few days later, I got an encrypted memo from Command. New protocol update for Valkyrie flight. Confidential delivery. Usually that meant a secure digital handoff or a base drop. But this time, the email was flagged as in-person courier. Officer discretion required. I messaged logistics and asked them to reroute it to Nevada. They wrote back, per instruction of Brigadier General Rhodes, materials will be hand-delivered to your current off-base location at time of receipt. Courier, Lieutenant Sloan. No alternative accepted. General sends his regards. I stared at the message for a solid minute. Lieutenant Sloan. That was Amber. Or, formerly, Amber. She must have graduated, received her rank, and been assigned as an official courier. That wasn't standard, which meant this wasn't standard. I didn't respond right away. I checked the timing. The estimated drop was the same night as Mom's party, 1900 hours, delivery window, flexible within location proximity. I sat back in my chair and looked at the invite, still pinned to the corner of my monitor. Here's the thing. I hadn't worn my uniform to anything personal in years. Not weddings, not funerals. Not the time Nadine begged me to speak at her son's school about leadership and female empowerment. Like I was a TED Talk in boots. But this? This wasn't about proving anything. It was about walking into a room full of people who had decided long ago that I wasn't worth noticing, and letting someone else walk in behind me and show them exactly what they'd missed. I didn't pack my full dress uniform, just a navy dress. Simple, clean lines, nothing loud. Low heels, hairpinned. Civilian, respectable, unthreatening. But I kept the ID badge in my bag, just in case. At 6:30, the day of the party, I ran drills like any other morning. I declined an optional strategy meeting at noon and checked my travel clearance. By 1500, I was on a transport flight east, carrying nothing but a small suitcase and the kind of calm that only comes from knowing you don't owe anyone a damn thing. I didn't tell anyone I was coming, didn't ask who would be there, didn't rehearse what I'd say, because some stories don't need speeches. They just need to walk into the room. I checked into a hotel 3 blocks from the restaurant and didn't bother unpacking. The room was beige, cold, and smelled like too much carpet cleaner, which was perfect. I laid out my dress on the back of the chair, steamed it with the hotel iron, and ran through the courier protocol in my head again. It wasn't complicated. It just had to be handled in person, acknowledged, and logged. That was it. At 6:55, I walked into the Birchstone room, a place that tried way too hard to be exclusive. The kind of restaurant where they dim the lights so you can't tell how small the portions are. The host was wearing gloves, which already annoyed me. "Name?" he asked without looking up. "Lena Whitmore, private room reservation." His eyes flicked to the list, then back to me like he was trying to do the math. "This way, Miss Whitmore." He led me past velvet curtains into a long, narrow dining room, lit like a candle, and was being filmed. My family was already there, 12 of them packed at a table that looked like it had been stolen from a wedding reception. I got a few polite nods. One cousin smiled like he'd just remembered I existed. Nadine stood in a flowy green wrap dress and walked toward me with both arms like we were long-lost sorority sisters. "There she is," she said, loud enough to echo. Didn't think the flight schedule would allow it. I let her air kiss my cheek and replied, "It's classified, but I made an exception." She laughed too hard, grabbed my elbow like we were best friends, then turned to the table and announced, "Lena's back from wherever she's been saving the world." I slid into the empty seat at the far end next to Colin, her husband, who looked like he was already 3 bourbons in. He asked, "So what's new in the skies?" before immediately losing interest and turning to argue about gas prices with someone across the table. Mom didn't look at me until the appetizers came. "Oh, honey," she said, cutting into her scallops. "You look rested." It sounded like an accusation. Dad glanced over and said, "Nice dress," in the tone you'd use for wallpaper. Nadine was mid-story about how hard it was to stage million-dollar homes, because some people just don't understand towel folding. Someone joked about her Range Rover getting keyed at Trader Joe's, and the table howled. No one asked what I'd been up to. No one asked if I was still flying. To them, I was still that background relative who sent the occasional Christmas card and never showed up to baby showers. Occasionally, someone would pass a plate like they were doing me a favor. Nadine's daughter spilt water near my chair and didn't notice. Mom kept looking down at the table, ensuring the wine flowed. It felt like watching a sitcom where I already knew the punchlines. Someone once said, "It's just so great to have everyone here." And I looked around like, who exactly is included in that sentence? Colin leaned in and asked, "Still single?" I nodded. He raised an eyebrow and said, "Well, guess that makes scheduling easier." Nadine laughed. "She's married to the mission, right?" I took a sip of water and smiled like that wasn't the 10th time I'd heard that line. I could feel the heat under my skin, not from anger, just a slow burn of being repeatedly filed under other. The food kept coming, small plates with decorative nonsense on top. I didn't finish most of it. I wasn't hungry. I was just clocking the minutes, watching them all lean into the comfort of each other, oblivious to how small they'd made the room feel. No one asked me why I'd come, and honestly, I didn't blame them. They hadn't noticed I was gone. Why start noticing now? I kept my hands in my lap and my mouth shut. which in this family counted as rebellion. Nadine was 3 stories deep into some saga about a couple who backed out of buying a colonial in Pinewood Hills because of bad energy in the foyer. She said that with a straight face while cutting into her salmon like she was solving climate change. People nodded, laughed, and added their own homebuyer horror stories. At one point, my mom said, "That's why I'm glad you stayed close, Nadine, always looking out for us." I didn't blink. That would have given too much away. Someone 2 seats down, a second cousin, or maybe his fiancé, I couldn't tell, turned to me and asked, "So Lena, do you still, do aviation stuff?" I said, "Yeah." He smiled like he was being polite. "Cool, like private jets?" "No." "Oh," he said, then turned back to his wine. Across the table, Nadine lifted her glass and said, "You know, I admire what you do. I could never live like that. Always on the move, no roots, just up and gone. It takes a certain kind of person to live with that kind of instability." Everyone nodded like she was making a toast instead of a jab. I said nothing. Colin jumped in, gesturing with his fork. "I mean, some people need that kind of structure, right? Like military life, it gives you rules, routine, for people who, crave that kind of order." Mom chimed in with, "Lena always liked rules, even as a kid. Wouldn't touch dessert until her plate was cleared." I didn't remind her that was because I'd get scolded if I didn't. Instead, I folded my napkin and took a slow sip of water. Nadine reached for the breadbasket and said, "We can't all just disappear for years at a time and expect people to wait around. Some of us have lives that don't pause." She smiled at me when she said it, like she thought it was clever. I met her eyes, calm. Some of us weren't asking anyone to wait. Her smile twitched. Not enough for anyone else to notice, but I saw it. The conversation kept rolling, but I wasn't in it. I watched from a distance like I was at someone else's reunion, a place where everyone spoke a language I used to know but stopped using years ago. Then Nadine dropped her fork on purpose and laughed. "God, remember that time in high school when Lena showed up to my cheer banquet in combat boots? Thought she was going to stage a military coup?" More laughs. Even my mom chuckled. I said they were steel-toe. I came straight from work. "Oh, relax," Nadine said, waving it off. "It was funny. You have to admit you've always been a little intense." I tilted my head slightly. "It's called command presence." Colin snorted. "Well, mission accomplished." Another cousin raised a glass and said, "To command presence," like it was a drinking game. I kept my posture straight, shoulders back and chin neutral. Years of training made that easy. The trick was to be the stillest thing in a loud room. People don't know what to do with that. I thought about all the times I'd let these conversations wash over me, half listening while counting ceiling tiles or watching condensation drip from a glass. It used to be my way of surviving these dinners, disappeared just enough to stay unbothered. But this time, I wasn't shrinking to fit the space. I was just taking inventory, not of their words, but of how little they'd changed. The noise was expected, familiar, predictable. It was the silence afterwards that carried weight. And they didn't even realize it was building. When the waiter came by to clear the plates, he leaned toward me and said quietly, "Miss Whitmore, you have a guest in the front lobby. He's asked for you by name. Says it's regarding a delivery." Every fork at the table froze. Nadine raised her eyebrows. "A delivery? Are you expecting roses?" I pushed my chair back slowly, stood up, and said, "No. Just documents." And with that, I turned and walked out, heels quiet but steady on the polished floor, while 12 heads followed me like they were trying to decide if I'd just left the dinner or started something they didn't understand. I didn't rush. I let the weight of my steps do the talking. The hallway outside the private dining room was dim and over-decorated, all dark wood panels and glass chandeliers pretending to matter. I walked past a sommelier who looked up long enough to register confusion. The host gave me a small, nervous smile. At the end of the corridor, just before the lobby, I turned the corner and saw him. Lieutenant Sloan. The flight suit was pressed, The boots were clean, and the posture was locked. Amber. She spotted me, squared her stance, and spoke with zero hesitation. Lieutenant Colonel Whitmore, ma'am. Courier delivery secured per directive. General Rhodes sends his compliments. Her voice was crisp, loud enough for the dining staff nearby to flinch slightly. She saluted with clean form, palm flat, elbow perfect. I returned the salute with matched precision. Thank you, Lieutenant. You may stand down. Yes, ma'am. She handed me a sealed folder with a secure tag across the flap. I nodded, took it, and tucked it under my arm like it was the least dramatic thing to happen all night. I looked at her for a beat longer than protocol required. She didn't blink, didn't shift, just stood still, eyes forward, holding the air like it was part of her job. That was new. That wasn't cadet behavior. That was soldier presence. She'd grown into the uniform, into the title. And she'd done it in less time than anyone expected, because she'd earned it. Good work, I said quietly. Yes, ma'am, she said, but her voice dipped just a little this time, enough to mean more. I turned and walked back down the corridor. She stayed behind me, still at attention, letting me exit first. As I passed the entrance to the dining room, I didn't look to see who was watching. I already knew. Every face, every expression, every raised eyebrow and frozen fork. Their silence stretched as plastic wrap pulled too tight over something starting to rot. I stepped into the room again, folder in hand, posture unchanged. I took my seat, slid the document into my bag, and picked up my water glass like nothing had happened. Sorry for the interruption, I said flatly. Please go on. No one moved. Colin finally coughed. Nadine blinked rapidly, mouth slightly open like her brain was buffering. My mother reached for her napkin, folded it, and refolded it like it had disrespected her. Dad swirled the last inch of wine in his glass, like it might hold the answer. Someone at the far end of the table, the cousin who'd asked if I flew private jets, leaned in closer, like suddenly I was worth hearing. Amber didn't enter the room. She didn't need to. The impact had already landed. The delivery hadn't been dramatic. It hadn't come with explosions or speeches. Just a uniform, a salute, and the kind of respect no one in that room had ever thought they'd have to witness firsthand. Nadine finally broke the silence with a brittle laugh. Okay, that was intense. I mean, who even does salutes outside of movies? Her voice cracked near the end. I didn't answer, didn't need to. The only people who fumble after a salute like that are the ones who don't know what it means. Or worse, the ones who do. The waiter brought dessert a few minutes later, some towering triple-layer thing with edible flowers and a candle stuck in the top, like it was trying to be festive. No one touched it. My mom looked at me and said, "We didn't realize how involved you were." I sipped water and said, "You never asked." A fork clinked against a plate somewhere. The air had changed. Not violently, not loudly, just undeniably. No one said it aloud, but they all knew something had shifted. I wasn't the one who'd been missing. I'd just stopped being invisible. I took a small bite of the cake just to break the silence with something that wasn't words. It tasted like sugar and air, expensive but forgettable. Kind of like most people at that table. Nobody moved, not really. Someone cleared their throat. My father glanced at the envelope sitting inside my purse, as if it might detonate. Nadine stared at it like she wanted to ask what was in it but couldn't figure out how without sounding smaller. That was the shift. Not just the salute, not just the formality of it all. It was how someone had walked in, acknowledged me publicly and respectfully, and left without fuss. No excuses, no jokes, no downplaying. It was the one thing no one at that table had ever offered me, and they didn't know what to do with it. I set my fork down calmly. My mother looked up, her voice just slightly too bright. "So, Lena." "Lieutenant Colonel, is it now?" I nodded. "Yes, ma'am." She blinked. That ma'am hit differently when it wasn't coming from her. My uncle chimed in, fumbling. 16 years, right? That's what he said, 16. "Yes, sir," I said, still flat but not cold. Just precise. Nadine sat straighter like she was trying to reclaim ground. Well, that's quite an accomplishment, she said. But you never mentioned any of this before. How were we supposed to know? I raised an eyebrow. You could have asked. I mean, she paused, laughed nervously. I always asked how you were. You asked if I was dating, I said. You asked if I still flew planes. But no, you never really asked. The tension cracked a little right then. Not loud, but sharp. She stared at me, blinking slowly as she'd stepped onto a moving walkway she wasn't ready for. I didn't press. I didn't gloat. I just let the truth sit in the open, breathing like oxygen. My mom tried to steer the ship. Well, we're proud of you. We didn't realize you were doing that level of work. I tilted my head. I sent a photo once, Christmas, 5 years ago, standing in front of a NATO jet with a general. Remember? She squinted. Oh yes, that was lovely. You put it under the pile of mail. She went quiet. My father, still holding his wine glass, even though it was empty, mumbled, Well, maybe we weren't tuned in, but that doesn't mean we weren't rooting for you. I looked at him for a beat. You once told me flying wasn't ladylike, that I should think about a stable job. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Just a slow, embarrassed shrug, like he was hoping time would revise the memory for him. Across the table, Colin finally spoke up, half joking. Well, I guess that courier made his point, huh? I smiled without teeth. She did. Lieutenant Sloan graduated top 5 in her class. Now she runs critical deliveries for joint ops. Good head on her shoulders. Colin blinked. Wait, she? Yes, I said, not blinking. She. My cousin's boyfriend, who had asked about private jets earlier, sat up a little straighter. Nadine tried again. Okay, but still, it felt kind of dramatic. The salute, the whole entrance. I shrugged. That wasn't for drama. That was just standard protocol. Nadine let out a dry laugh, but it didn't land. The room wasn't laughing anymore. I didn't speak again for a while. Let the silence stretch, dense and deliberate. I watched them sit in it, chew it and shift under it. Because this wasn't a speech. This wasn't a revenge moment with fireworks and applause. This was just what happens when the room realizes it misjudged someone. And there's no punchline to bail them out. A waiter appeared and asked if we wanted coffee. No one answered, so I said, Sure, black, no cream. He nodded and left, and the table stayed quiet, because for once they couldn't out-talk what had already been said without words. I stirred the coffee slowly, not because it needed it, just because it gave my hands something to do while the room recalibrated. You could feel it was happening in real time. The way chairs shifted slightly, and the silverware clinked too carefully like everyone was trying to reset the tone without acknowledging what had just dropped on the table. Across from me, Nadine dabbed her mouth with her napkin. Her lipstick had faded, and her hand shook just enough that only I would notice. She didn't speak, which told me everything I needed to know. The silence stretched, not uncomfortable for me, but unbearable for them. Because for the first time, they weren't in control of the narrative. There was no punchline they could toss in to wrap this up with a bow. No room left for polite little lies to soften the shape of the truth. The cousin who always talked too much was scrolling her phone now, pretending not to listen. My dad was still cradling his wine glass like he could wring valuable something out of it. My mother looked between me and Nadine like she was trying to judge how salvageable this moment was. Then finally, from across the table, Nadine muttered, I just didn't know. I met her eyes. She blinked again. Nobody ever told me, I said evenly. That's because you never asked. That landed harder than anything I'd said all night. Not because it was harsh, but because it was true, and she knew it. Everyone did. Nadine looked down at her lap. Her hands were folded tightly, knuckles pale. She didn't respond. Not verbally. She just sat there in it, letting the silence answer for her. Then my mother, always the fixer, said softly, Why didn't you tell us about any of this? The training programs, the deployments, the command work. We could have We could have sent something. I tilted my head. You mean like the time you sent flowers when I graduated flight school? She furrowed her brow, confused. Did we not? No, I said, gently but firmly. You sent a Facebook message that said, "Stay safe," and then asked if I could Venmo Nadine for a stroller she liked. My mom's face paled, lips tightening like she was trying to hold something in. But I wasn't angry, not anymore. I was just reciting facts like I was reading off coordinates. Cold, precise, nothing extra. You always acted like I disappeared, I said, voice low. But the truth is, I was never hiding. You just stopped looking. No one interrupted. No one tried to defend themselves now. Because there was no defense. Not for years of casual neglect wrapped in holiday platitudes and group texts. You make it sound like we ignored you on purpose, Nadine said, finally looking up. Her voice had lost its usual polish. You chose this life, Lena. You chose to be gone. You built a wall and never let us in. I nodded. I built a life, not a wall. You just weren't interested in the foundation. She shook her head like she was trying to clear static. You always made it sound like we didn't matter, she said. I didn't have to say it, I replied. You made it clear what did. That was it. No yelling. No slammed fists or storm-outs. Just quiet truths laid out like cards, face up. And they didn't know how to play that kind of hand. I took another sip of coffee. Still hot. Still bitter. The waiter returned to clear plates no one had touched. He glanced around nervously, probably sensing the tension, but not understanding the source. That's the thing about these moments. They don't scream. They hum, low and constant. Like the sound of altitude pressure in your ears when you've flown too high for too long. I looked down at the table at people who had known me since childhood and realized they didn't know me. And that wasn't tragic. It was just math. I'd spent years trying to earn their notice, their pride, their invitations. And now, sitting there with their silence finally louder than their noise, I understood. I never needed any of it. I gently placed the coffee cup down, then stood. No announcement, no speech, just done. My chair scraped quietly against the floor, the sound impossibly loud in a room suddenly afraid to breathe. Nobody stopped me. Not even Nadine, whose hands were now tightly folded. That her knuckles had gone white. I slipped the folder into my purse, adjusted the strap on my shoulder, and gave the room one last glance. Not sentimental. Not bitter, just complete. I've got a 0600 debriefing, I said, tone flat and final. I'll leave you to the celebration. My mother opened her mouth, probably to say something soft and performative, but nothing came out. Her eyes tracked me like I might shatter if she blinked too long. I didn't linger. I walked past Colin, who leaned back in his chair like he suddenly wanted to be very small, past my cousin's boyfriend, who was aware he'd spent most of dinner talking to the wrong person. Past my dad, whose grip on the stem of his wineglass never loosened. Nadine didn't say a word. She didn't have to. Her silence had finally learned how to speak. At the edge of the room, just beyond the draped archway, Lieutenant Sloan was still waiting by the entrance like she was guarding a war room. Back straight, hands behind her back, a portrait of control. Our eyes met momentarily, not a question, not a check-in. Just a quiet acknowledgement that the air had changed. I gave her a subtle nod. She stepped forward, opened the door for me, and stood at attention as I passed. Every eye in that room followed me now. Halfway through the doorway, I paused, not to make a statement or look back dramatically. Just to exist, just to be seen. Not as a daughter, not as a sister, not as a ghost. As a whole person. Then I turned, not toward Nadine or my parents, but toward the table as a collective. And I said calmly, clearly, I serve with people who don't need to understand everything I've done to respect me for doing it. The words landed without resistance. I didn't wait for reactions. I didn't need them. I walked out, my heels steady and my spine straight. The door closed behind me with a soft click that felt louder than any slam could have managed. The lobby smelled like citrus and leather, cool and clean. I stood there for a beat, letting the dining room noise dissolve behind the heavy wood. Lieutenant Sloan stood nearby, eyes front, not watching but knowing. "No need to escort, Lieutenant," I said. "You're dismissed." "Yes, ma'am." She didn't salute this time, just gave a respectful nod, which meant we were good without needing extra layers. As she turned and exited through a side hallway, I pulled out my phone and called for the rental car. It was already waiting for curbside. I didn't check my messages, didn't scroll. No one had texted anyway. The air outside was sharper than I remembered. Not cold, just honest. After hours of room temperature pleasantries and overpriced wine, it filled my lungs like something real. I got into the car, buckled in, and pulled away from the Birchstone room without looking back. The glowing sign disappeared in the rear view as I merged onto the quiet street, letting the night stretch ahead of me in silence. I didn't turn on the radio, didn't need a soundtrack. Some exits don't need music. They just need to be finalized. No one chased me. No one called out from the entrance or sent a follow-up text. Not even one of Nadine's hollow social media posts about family forgiveness or fresh starts. And honestly, that silence was the most honest thing they'd ever given me. When I reached the hotel, I knew I wasn't staying the night. I packed in under 4 minutes, checked out at the desk without a word, and drove straight back to base under the cover of a sky that didn't ask questions. There was nothing left behind worth unpacking. The base was still dark when I pulled onto the tarmac, headlights sweeping over hangars like they were keeping secrets. The wind pushed across the concrete in cold gusts, sharp enough to wake whatever sleep still clung to my skin. I didn't mind. It felt clean, honest, like something you could count on. I parked near the operations building, cut the engine, and stepped out into the quiet. The air carried the faint scent of fuel and metal, normalcy. The only perfume that ever made sense. Inside, lights flickered on automatically as I walked down the corridor, my boots thudding softly against the tile, clipboard in hand. The folder is still tucked under my arm. Everything is as it should be. No swan napkins, no birthday cake, no audience. Outside again before long. The Flightline stretched ahead, open, still damp from the overnight condensation. Rows of training aircraft glinted under the pre-dawn light. In the distance, a fresh rotation of cadets stood in formation, jackets zipped high, eyes squinting into the wind. They noticed me before I reached them. I could always tell the moment it happened, the subtle shift in posture, the straightening of backs, the way idle chatter dropped off mid-sentence like someone hit mute. Not fear, not even obligation, just presence. They didn't know where I had been last night. Didn't care. All that mattered was that I was here now. I showed up with a clipboard, no coffee, no excuses. "Ma'am," one of them said, voice firm. "Cadet," I nodded back. We ran through the morning checks. Wind speed, visibility, pre-flight readiness. Half of them still had sleep creases on their cheeks. One girl's gloves were mismatched, green and black, but she didn't fidget. That mattered more. By 0600 sharp, we were wheels up. I rode the second seat on the training sortie, letting the junior pilot take the lead. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was calm. I said nothing for the first 10 minutes to see how she handled altitude. She did fine. Better than fine. Back on the ground, she asked if she could correct her maneuver log. I nodded. "Always chase better. That's how you stay in the air." "Yes, ma'am." She didn't smile, but I caught the edge of pride in her voice. The rest of the day unfolded in drills, checklists, and short silences filled with doing instead of talking. The kind of silence I preferred. No room for birthday toasts or backhanded compliments. Just engines, pressure, and earned trust. Around noon, I passed Lieutenant Sloan in the hallway near the comms bay. She gave a crisp nod but didn't stop walking. That's the kind of respect I understood. Not performative, not needy, just mutual and clear. I grabbed lunch in the mess, something vaguely resembling chicken, and sat alone by a window overlooking the strip. A few cadets passed behind me, talking low about turbine delay procedures. One misquoted a protocol, and the other corrected him without flinching. Good. That's how you build something that lasts. I thought about the night before briefly, not the room or the looks or the cake, just the moment the door clicked shut behind me, the stillness that came after, the finality of it. I didn't regret going. I didn't regret walking out. Some stories aren't meant to be understood by those who watched us grow. They're meant to be respected by the ones who see what we become. Not because of them, but despite them, and that's enough. Someone walked past me and nodded. Colonel. Lieutenant, I replied. I stayed at the window a while longer, watching the airfield. Planes lined up like patient soldiers. The wind picked up, and the flag outside snapped to attention. No one noticed but me. That was fine. I didn't need recognition. I had clarity. I had the sky. And most days, that was more than enough. I used to think closure looked like a hug, apology, or overdue recognition. But real closure is quieter than that. It's when you stop waiting for someone else to define you. That night at the restaurant wasn't some grand reckoning. It didn't fix anything. It didn't break anything either. It made the truth visible. To them, maybe for the first time. They saw me. Not fully, not deeply, but enough to shift the ground a little. And I didn't need more than that, because the real victory wasn't the salute or the silence that followed. I was walking out with my spine straight and my peace intact. I'm not missing. I was never lost. I just stopped circling people who only recognized me when I stood still. And now, I fly. Every single day. If stories like this hit something real for you, stories about quiet revenge, family drama, and finding your voice where it was never welcome, go ahead and subscribe. We've got more like it coming. Not loud, not fake, just honest.